And I'm now very pleased to introduce my friend, Emeritus Professor Stephen Schwartz, AM, who is the Executive Director of CHASS. He's a Senior Advisor at the Noose Group, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies and a member of the boards of charitable, government and private organisations. He's the immediate past Chairman of the Australian-American Fulbright Commission, formerly VC of Macquarie University, Brunel University and Murdoch University, and has held positions at the University of Texas, UQ, UWA and Balliol College, Oxford. He's Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia, Royal Society Exchange Fellow, a NATO Fellow, WHO Fellow, a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Management, the Institute of Company Directors. And he's the author of 13 books, more than 120 scientific articles, and hundreds of newspaper and magazine articles. Stephen.
Thank you, John, for that amazingly hyperbolic introduction. This session's called Speed Dating for HASS Researchers. We got the idea from what I call the dinner party problem. And it's a kind of a dinner party challenge. You're sitting in a dinner party and you're seated next to someone you don't know. This could happen tonight for those of you who are coming to the dinner. So there you are. The conversation's going pretty well, there are some pleasantries, and then she turns to you and she says, "And what do you do?" Now, would you be able to answer this question before your dinner party companion's eyes begin to glaze over? For a lot of academics, this can be a major challenge. Brevity is not one of our strongest suits, but it should be. It's to be able to explain what you do clearly and succinctly to a non-expert is not just useful at dinner parties. It's essential when you're interviewing for a job or for a new position anywhere, asking foundations for money, talking to politicians, wooing publishers, finding new collaborators, and speaking to the press. Now, Americans often refer to the elevator speech. You know, you've gone into an elevator, you've met someone there, you're trying to impress them, you've only got a few minutes before the elevator reaches the floor and they get off. You have no time for details, and jargon just won't cut it at all. You know you've got this very brief time to do it, so you've got to get it all in quickly. And you know you've succeeded if, when the elevator door opens, the person says, "I wish I knew more about that. We should meet again. I'd like to know more about your work." Today, we're going to see this particular skill in action. We're fortunate enough to have 7 senior HASS researchers who are not shy, who are brave enough to come up here and talk for 3 minutes about their research. Now, we have a judges panel as well. So let me start by introducing the judges, and perhaps you can stand up when I do this. Paul Delgarno, who is the deputy editor for the Arts and Culture section of the Conversation website. Susanna Elliott, who's the CEO of the Science Media Centre, and Julie Hare, who's the higher education editor of The Australian. Now, these are hard-headed, no-nonsense journalists, right? So don't try to smooth things over with them. Don't try to fool them. They've heard it all before. Try to make her laugh. The jurors' verdict will be final. They're going to be keeping score and watching out for little ticks in our presentations, and they're going to be looking at, is this comprehensible to a non-specialist audience? Is it interesting? Does it want me to hear more about it? And they're going to decide on a winner. The winner will receive a prize of $500. But we also want to know what the people's choice is. So we'd like you to be involved. Now, you've all got a bag, which means you've all got a pad. So take out the pad out of your bag and a pen. And as you hear the speakers introduced, write down their name, give them a rating based on how comprehensible they were, how clear they were, how excited and engaging they were, make you want to hear more about it. And at the end, I'll collect those, and we'll have a people's choice and a juror's choice. So you can rate them in any ranking you want, do whatever you like, but we need one name from you, okay? Now, the way it works is I'll introduce the speakers. I'll tell you very little about them because I don't want to prejudice their research. And I want them to be able to use their 3 minutes to tell you about themselves. There will be a bell rung at 3 minutes. That means it's over. And we will then introduce the next one. The judges will keep track of all this, and we're all going to have a good time, right? Right, okay. You sound more convinced. Okay, so it's now time for me to introduce the first speaker, and that's Tom Clark. Tom's the discipline group leader for writing, communication, and culture at Victoria University here in Melbourne. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you. So, I want to take the clear, compelling, elegant welcome that Uncle Bill presented this morning as a bit of a point of conceptual departure for what we're about to discuss. In 2008, Australia's Prime Minister said sorry to the stolen generations. Who's sorry? For what exactly? We're expecting a referendum on recognising Australia's original inhabitants in the Constitution soon. What will that mean? These are core issues for Aboriginal reconciliation, but I think we need to get a clear handle on why non-Indigenous Australians would care about them, because that's 97% of the resident population. Do any ordinary people actually regard themselves as non-Indigenous, let alone ordinary? The only satisfactory reply to such questions is to ask, and so, with Australian Research Council support, we've commissioned 8 focus groups of non-Indigenous Australians around Australia at 4 sites: Sydney, Bega, Perth and Gladstone. At each site there's been a group born in Australia and a group born overseas, and these groups have been discussing their sense of non-Indigenous responsibility for the current and historical situation of Australia's Aboriginal peoples. Unsurprisingly, we found strong ideological disagreements between participants, as well as some significant differences across the groups. But we've been very struck by some important similarities too, and as a poetics researcher collaborating with political scientists, I've been particularly interested in the stuff around language style. We've seen an uncontested sense, an unstated consensus across our participants that the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples does merit further work, and that reconciliation is an adequate label for that work, and this is quite contrary to some expert opinion. These non-Indigenous participants all speak in the terms of a core paradigm of pronouns, an us and them, where we means all non-Indigenous Australians, however recently arrived. Yeah? In other words, we is a distinct bargaining unit in this scene. This we understands reconciliation as something to negotiate with them, which refers to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. You might have seen Sean Micallef ripping on the same theme a couple of weeks ago. So, what does the we want to negotiate with the them? Australia must enable a sense its non-Indigenous we has figured out our negotiating position. So only then can negotiation start from points of consensus about what needs reconciling. This is deliberative democracy at work, a phrase you may be familiar with. The idea is any democracy needs conceptual anchors to help it address such complex questions about itself. That is of the nature of democracy. And so the next stages of our research will drill down with one-to-one interviews, exploring how a country like Australia might enable just such a deliberation. How can the we get genuinely ready to negotiate with the them in this scene? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was Tom Clark from Victoria University. The next speaker is Karen Farquharson. She's Associate Dean for Research and Engagement in the Department of Education and Social Sciences at Swinburne University. Welcome, Karen.
In 2007, a young Sudanese-Australian man named Leib Ghoni was murdered at Noble Park train station in Melbourne. Media reports of Ghoni's murder focused on the fact that he had been murdered by a gang of Sudanese thugs. And the reports raised questions about the ability of Sudanese peoples to integrate into Australian society. These concerns were echoed by the then Minister for Immigration, Kevin Andrews, who was concerned about the ability of Sudanese migrants to fit into Australian society. Turns out that Ghoni was actually murdered by 2 young white Australian men who had been going out with the intention to do a racist bashing. He wasn't murdered by a gang of Sudanese. Nevertheless, the negative media representations have had ongoing impacts, according to our Sudanese participants in our study, on their lives. So, what do you do if you are a minority community, such as the Sudanese and South Sudanese, about having a media voice? One of the most striking things about the media coverage of the Goni case was the absolute lack of Sudanese or South Sudanese voices. No one was interviewed. Police, government officials, non-government organizations spoke on behalf of the Sudanese. The Sudanese were not asked to speak on behalf of themselves. In 2010, we put together the Ausud Media Project. The Ausud Media Project was a journalism training program and a media intervention. The media intervention had 3 parts. The first part was to train interested Sudanese and South Sudanese Australians to write their own and report their own stories for the media. The second part was to help them to engage with the mainstream media, both by working with journalists as sources for journalist stories, but also enabling them to talk back when the media didn't represent their group accurately. The third part was an intervention with the journalists themselves. So we wanted to link working journalists with members of the Sudanese community so that they could improve their reporting. All participants in the program, in the training program, about 35 of them, were paired with working journalists across all forms of media. All the training was provided by working journalists, some of them quite senior. So all the journalists who participated in the program therefore had links with the Sudanese community. The outcomes of the project were that the people who participated in the project did feel that they had a better engagement with the media and did feel heard. They wrote some stories in mainstream media, some stories on their own blog, and many of them have been quoted in the mainstream media. As I said, all the journalists who were involved in the project now have links with the Sudanese community. The project also raises some challenges for us, and one of those challenges is clearly it works. It's a good way of helping minority communities to have a media voice, but it's expensive. And one of the challenges, ongoing challenges, is training up new people who might be interested, and sustainability. And so that's where I'll leave you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was Karen Farquharson from Swinburne University. Next up is Jo Lindsay, who's the convener of Sociology and Gender Studies in the School of Social Science at Monash University. Jo's also the president of the Australian Sociological Association. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. I'm going to talk about overconsumption, and I'm going to talk about starting in your backyard. So the problem that we have is that we are consuming too much stuff. This is leading to environmental destruction and global warming, as you can see. And I want to talk about the Australian backyard as an example of this. The Australian backyard is shrinking and it's heating up. We have larger houses on smaller lots with very few trees and little green space. And this really started taking off in the 1990s. Now, it's a problem for the environment because there's limited biodiversity in suburbs, there's poor microclimate in terms of loss of shade, there's poor stormwater management if we've got no green space around our houses. There's reduced opportunities for carbon capture and pollution removal if we don't have trees and grass. There's increased electricity consumption for cooling and lighting in our houses. And obviously this makes for problems for people too. So we have uncomfortable houses and yards. It's difficult for us to interact with the public realm, particularly when you've got your garage out the front and you just drive into that and don't see your neighbours. There's little space for sitting out, for children to play outside, for drying laundry, for growing food. You have dark interiors with little natural ventilation and no outlook. So what can we do to solve this? It's not an easy thing, it's a wicked problem. As I said, overconsumption is a wicked problem. It's a difficult thing to solve. But my main contribution to the debate and the focus of research that I am working on now and would like to develop is that we need to recognise that most of our consumption is social. People buy things and use things because they're wanting to enact their relationships and belonging. So, of course, systematic problems need to be solved. To solve the problem of our backyard, we need to think about the economy, about planning, and about public awareness and debate around green backyards. We also need to manage social change better. As parents work longer hours and commuting times stretch out and our suburbs become denser. But the 3 photos I've put up here are really to get you to think about the houses in those outer suburbs. And there are people there who are living their social lives and their family lives. That's why they're out there. So on the left, those kids could do with some shade. The ones in the middle, they could do with some green space. And the family on the right could do with some back space in their yard as well as some front space. Right. So, what we need to do, I want to put to you that we need to take our social relationships into account and make sure that these are central in the way that we go about solving the problem of the shrinking backyard. Backyards provide important social services, our relationships and our interaction with nature, as well as ecosystem services, cooling, stormwater management, etc. We need to grow our community connection to local environments and to green backyards. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was Joe Lindsay from Monash. The next speaker is Graham Oppy. Graham's the head. Oh, yeah, we're doing alphabetical order. Oh, were you? Sorry. Anticipation is. We can look forward to it. It's anticipation that makes for the fun. Graham Oppy is the head of the School of Philosophical, Historical and International Studies at Monash University. He's also chair of the Council of the Australasian Association of Philosophy. Please welcome Graham.
Okay, the guiding question for my research is, does God exist? On its own, this question is intractable. As with other philosophical questions, there's no method to follow in seeking to answer it. Moreover, there's no serious prospect of reaching an agreed answer. There are, however, related questions that are more tractable. There are questions about arguments. Are there persuasive arguments that God exists, that God doesn't exist, that we should suspend judgment on the question whether God exists? There are also questions about reason and rationality. Can you reasonably believe that God exists, that God doesn't exist, that we may or maybe that we should suspend judgment on the question? And there are questions about divine attributes. What properties would God have if God existed? What would God be like if there were a God? The most tractable questions concern the arguments about the existence of God. While we can't assess arguments that haven't yet been developed, we can certainly assess all of the arguments developed so far. I've spent a great deal of my career doing this. So far, I've found that we don't have any arguments on any side that ought to persuade. I say this result's unsurprising. If we did have arguments that ought to persuade, we'd all agree on the answer to my central question. The questions about reason and rationality are also moderately tractable. Difficulties arise because there are many different things that you might mean by reason and rationality. However, we can certainly identify different meanings for these terms and try to answer our questions under those different meanings. So far, I've found that if our interpretation sets low standards for reasonableness, any of theism, atheism or agnosticism can be reasonably adopted. If our interpretation sets high standards for reasonableness, we're unable to determine whether any of these positions can be reasonably adopted. The questions about divine attributes are not much more tractable than the central question about existence. There are many different conceptions of God and no clear methods to pursue in trying to determine which of those conceptions would be realised if there were a God. Certainly we can show that some conceptions of God are inconsistent, but there are many conceptions of God that have not yet been shown to be inconsistent. In short, I haven't found persuasive arguments on any side. I haven't found any standards for reasonableness or rationality under which one side is favoured by others. Should I be disappointed with these outcomes? I don't think so. Public and academic discussions of these questions typically generate no light and vast quantities of heat. Those discussions would be much improved if everyone took to heart the lessons that I've learnt from my research.
But Graham, does God exist?
I'll tell you later.
That was Green Oppy from Monash University. Now, Robert, it's your turn. The next speaker is Robert Phiddian, who's Deputy Dean of the School of Humanities and Creative Arts at Flinders University. He's also the Director of the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres, and I don't think he would mind me reminding you that they're meeting here next week. Yep. Robert, it's your turn.
Okay, look at these guys. Old white guys in wigs, as my daughter likes to point out. What could possibly be the point of researching them these days? My answer is because what they did was crucial in the development of that complex beast, a free press. How they did it has urgent lessons about how that freedom can be maintained in countries like Australia, how developed elsewhere. So who are they? They're three friends from early 18th century Britain, some of the greatest satirists in the language. On the top is Jonathan Swift, because that's where I think he belongs, author of Gulliver's Travels. In the middle, Alexander Pope, the master of the heroic couplet, author of the Dunciad. And on the bottom, John Gay, the author of the great comic opera, The Beggar's Opera. They were the first satirists to write flagrantly and openly against the government of their day, that government of Sir Robert Walpole. Before them, political satire was prosecuted as sedition. After them, it was grudgingly tolerated. They found one of the essential, if not sufficient, conditions of a modern free press, in large part because Walpole chose not to take them on with oppressive force. They survived. He chose instead to take them on with that spin and shamelessness which we've all come to know and love amongst politicians in relatively democratic countries. So it worked for him. Walpole was the first and longest serving Prime Minister. My point is that a free press is not only the freedom to discuss public issues in a measured and sensible manner, it must be a theatre for the public emotions. Among these, the emotions of anger, disgust and contempt that characterise satire, emotions that we now know an awful lot more about because of recent cognitive scientific research. Civil society needs space for spectacular incivility. So the fact that my dead white guys got away with it is integral to the freedom that gives us this, which is a cartoon from the last days of the 2013 election campaign. Perhaps you argue this development of satire is now just history, something we can take for granted so we can focus our research dollars on innovation rather than conservation. I don't think so for two reasons. Firstly, my guys lived in the first great age of print. We live in the first great age of digital media. That is changing the rules, and knowing what the fundamentals are is a crucial anchor for understanding how those rules can and should change. And secondly, these young women, Pussy Riot, live in a country where satire is suppressed. Billions live in similar conditions. How to bring those passions out into the open in Russia, China, even Singapore, depends on knowing what works and why. Of course, things pan out differently in different times and places, but there's a line between my dead white guys and the living rebels who are Pussy Riot. The work that helps us draw that line can make us a more open and tolerant world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, and that's a very nice segue into this afternoon's session, which will be on exactly that topic of freedom of speech. Our next person to speak is Deborah Joan, who's the chair of the Department of Media and Communication at Deakin University. Welcome, Deb.
I was promised a mouse, and indeed I have one. Okay, I'm going to get a timekeeper. I'm going to get a countdown on the way in. So, the mouse, will it work? Dead mouse. Oh, there we go. No, what I'll do, yes, I'll get you to play and I'll get the audience to count me in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For the past 3 years, I've been working on ways to help people navigate a path through the expanding world of online information. Computers have conclusively changed the way we undertake our research. Digitisation now means that a trip to the library is only a few keystrokes away. As academics in an age of information abundance, we need to learn new ways to discover things and to make sure we are discoverable. And we need to do this in ways that are aligned with our disciplinary outlooks. In the humanities and creative arts, for example, research is often conceived as an exciting journey to an uncertain location rather than the instrumental solving of problems. In recent years, librarians and computer scientists have applied themselves to the challenge of digital information retrieval. Many of their strategies are designed to produce more efficiency in information seeking, to seek the shortest path, but this is to misjudge the value of information meandering for many humanities researchers. What we really want is the online equivalent of wandering into the library to find a particular book and unexpectedly spying another equally useful book out of the corner of our eye. The goal, in effect, is to increase the opportunities for serendipitous discovery in online research. Serendipity can be defined as those happy accidents where a researcher discovers through a combination of luck and acumen something of value they didn't even know they wanted. It's based on a type of non-prescriptive and inclusive thinking in which non-logical connections are just as important as logical ones. To put it simply, serendipity is the X factor of humanities research. The trouble is most online resources are not well suited to serendipitous discovery. Google, for example, is great at telling you what you already know based on where you've already been. The result is that a great deal of online research is stuck in a self-contained bubble. Finding an escape route that leads to fresh approaches and new discoveries seems impossible. The semantic web might offer one avenue by delivering meaning and structure to information, but the technologies to support it are still developing. These are the sorts of challenges we faced when we created the Humanities Networked Infrastructure, or HONEY. HONEY is a new digital platform for anyone seeking to understand more about Australia's diverse and abundant cultural heritage. We wanted HONEY to help people navigate humanities and creative arts information in ways that would produce the most inspiring outcomes. Rather than standardising contributing datasets to produce uniform search results, HONEY harnesses the insights of the crowd to create a sense of surprise. HONEY is explicitly designed to help you discover what you don't already know. How? By allowing researchers to build their own network of pathways between information resources and then linking these to the avenues built by other researchers, HONEY crowdsources for serendipity. The success of HONEY then is dependent on the collaboration of its participants, their generosity and their commitment to open sharing. In this way, HONEY helps us to reimagine both our relationships to information and to each other. By becoming part of the HONEY research community, you too might just get lucky.
Thank you, Deb. This is kind of an X factor for HASS researchers, isn't it? The last speaker today, because her name comes at the back of the alphabet, is Andrea Whitcomb, who's Director of the Cultural Heritage Centre for Asia and Deputy Director of the Alfred Deakin Research Institute at Deakin University. Welcome, Andrea.
So, how does this work? Okay. We all recognise how heritage is used to establish forms of collective identity. It seems innocuous enough, and indeed expected. What we don't so often think about are the downsides of this use of heritage. As major conflicts indicate, heritage sites are one of the first things that get destroyed when people go to war with one another. However, there are plenty of everyday contexts in which we need to think about as well. This is particularly so in contexts where there are culturally diverse societies, Indigenous populations, and difficult histories that need acknowledgements. Now, the first response to this problem has been incorporating forgotten voices with the aim of promoting tolerance. However, this largely fails because it is built on a declamatory pedagogy, which privileges the giving of voice rather than establishing conversations across differences. It also fails because tolerance involves unequal power relations. So what we need, then, are exhibition strategies that encourage people to recognise how they are entangled with each other, what I call a pedagogy of feeling. Why? Because difficult histories in societies that aim to build social cohesion based on principles of valuing cultural diversity imply a need to overcome distance between self and other, a need to address multiple audiences in ways that foster dialogue between them, and a perspective that does not separate the past from the present and the future. So my work then seeks to identify exhibitions and heritage sites that aim to do these things and analyses the way in which they do this. I do so by analysing how these exhibitions challenge collective narratives that erase difficult histories, by demonstrating the ways in which our historical experiences are mutually constituted rather than separate parallel stories. And I look at the ways in which these exhibitions provide a space in which to realise that the past is an unfinished business. I have found that these exhibitions will stage encounters that work through the senses in ways that promote a deep emotional as well as thoughtful engagement. That they will be doing different things for different audiences, such as providing affirmation to those who were dispossessed, while simultaneously challenging the collective memory of those engaged in the dispossessing. And that there will be a strong sense of first-person narrative voice rather than impersonal third-person voice of the institution, giving a sense that a testimony is being given and that you are invited to be the witness. So the result is knowing how to produce representations of heritage that recognise that our futures are tied to how we think of each other. As Gangalu elder Lilla Watson put it at the Immigration Museum here in Melbourne, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Now, I think you'll all agree with me that every one of our presenters here this morning would make a charming and fascinating dinner party companion. So would you join me in giving the all of the speakers, the whole panel, a round of applause, please? Now, talk to each other. If you're not sure, compare your notes. If you'd like to, come up with a name each and pass them down to the end of the room, that end. So you're right. Meanwhile, the judges will deliberate. Okay, everybody, can I just call you to... I know everybody's hungry. I can hear the tummies rumbling all the way over here. And we're going to now announce the winners, and I'm going to ask Paul, on behalf of the judges, to come up here and announce the judges' choice.
Yeah, drum roll.
There's no envelope, you just have to improvise.
First, I think we were all in agreement that the presentations were fantastic. I'd be happy to be stuck in a lift with any of the people, and I was thinking... I was thinking while it was happening how good it would be to be stuck in a lift with all the people and just get all those ideas fired at you. So they were all really good. The one that we thought swung it, I guess, swung it in the sense that even though they were all excellent, there was a clarity of communication that when we kind of walked away from our seats, it was really easy to say, well, that's what this one was about. We can see how it would work. There was a bit about the methodology. It was beautifully delivered, etc. So without further ado, we thought the winner was Tom Clark. So thanks.
You can shake everyone's hand. But now
I go back down to my seat.
if you like.
Yeah.
Okay. And the winner of the People's Choice, I'm happy to announce, was very close. And so I'm going to tell you both names because it was not very much difference between them. One was Deb Verhoeven. Stand up, Deb. Are you still here, Deb? Stand up so everyone can say thank you for that presentation. And the other was Robert Phiddian. So Robert, up here.